Let's get started in prayer if you guys don't mind just joining me. God, we just thank you so much for today. We thank you for this church body that's made up of many parts that all have different functions and different purposes that you've ordained, God. I just pray today that your word will come through, that we would hear what it is that you have for us to hear. We would learn what it is that you would have for us to learn. Thank you so much for this communion that we are able to celebrate, to remember that you gave your blood, you gave your body for us. In your name, amen. Well, I'm excited to share with y'all today about something that's very near and dear to my heart. Last week, Phil Grieb, when he preached, he talked about this book called Grace Can Lead Us Home. This book right here, I highly recommend this book. I've actually asked, and I'm talking to the liturgy team to see if maybe we can make this a series or if we could possibly do a class. This book changed my heart in many ways. This book was given to us by Jessica Trujillo, right here, who's one of our co-leaders at Stack Life. She brought this book to me, and she goes, there's this book, and the author is coming to the Bay in like 2 weeks. So we zoomed through the book. I reached out, and he came and hung out with us here. He went and toured South Hayward Parish with us. He came over here. We ate. We had a good time. We got to ask him a lot of questions. He has a lot of experience in working in the homeless community. He worked in Skid Row in LA, and also was almost an ordained minister, but decided to step away from ordination to go into full-time homeless ministry. But Kevin Nye is a great individual that's challenging us in so many ways. So I would highly suggest this. If you want to see it, you want to take a picture, we've got the graphic there. I think it's worth every church person on the planet reading this book. So that's my last promo for that. But not just because this book deals with our response to homelessness, because I know there's a lot of like practical things where people are like, you should do this and you should do that, and you should make these things happen in your church programs. But the beautiful part about Kevin Nye's book is it talks about like the heart of the matter. Like, what is God's heart for this situation, for this tragedy? Today, I'm going to talk about 3 specific concepts that he brings up. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not actually going to dig all the way into the book. So please don't think that this is exhaustive. Everything I'm talking about today is only in the introduction of his book. I was like going through and I was like, how many things can I cover? And I was like, that's too far. I got into chapter 1 and I was like, just stop. That's too much. So this book has a lot of things to offer, but I'm going to talk about 3 things that he's bringing us to understand and to learn. Most of us are familiar with that verse that Jen read for us earlier, Jeremiah 29:11. And it's a verse that brings encouragement. When I became a pastor, first time my mom gave me a Bible. And on that Bible came with a leather cover, and it was embossed, and on the front of it, it had Jeremiah 29:11, right? For I know the plans I have for you, right? And that verse is just, it rings true in all of us in many different ways. I want to look at it, if we could just zoom out just a little bit, we're going to look into it a little bit deeper and talk about what that means for our unhoused community. So if we start in Jeremiah 29, verse 7, it says, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare, you will find your welfare. This is specifically the ESV version, and I want to touch on that word welfare. We're going to dig into that for a little bit. Then it says, for thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, do not let your prophets and your diviners who are among you deceive you, and do not listen to the dreams that they dream, for it's a lie that they are prophesying to you in my name. I do not send them, declares the Lord. For thus says the Lord, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I'll visit you, and I'll fulfill you my promise, and bring you back to this place. And this is verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord. And I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations and all the places where I have driven you, declares the Lord. And I will bring you back to the place from which I sent you into exile. That's the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. When we look in that word welfare, there's a bunch of different versions, but what they're trying to say really is welfare. And that word, the root of that is shalom. Can y'all say shalom? Shalom. And shalom is a very interesting word because it's not just saying like peace be with you. It actually is a word that means collective peace. It means collective peace and collective freedom, the welfare of our community. In that verse 7, it says, "But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare." In verse 11, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." See, this word shalom, it's the idea that if one of us is not free, all of us are not free. Shalom. And we will be free once all of us are free. Shalom. So what does that mean for us today? Like, how do we live out shalom in our daily lives today? Well, I'm going to tell y'all it's not easy. It's not easy. Because one of our tendencies as a human nature is to oppress. One of our tendencies as people who gain power, as you gain influence, is to step on those under our power. This last month was Pride Month. And it's not just a month of celebration, fam. It's actually a month of protest. To protest the mistreatment and untimely death of our siblings that are members of the LGBTQIA2S+ community. If you dig into it, you'll learn that there's a lot of roots in actual violence towards individuals just because of their identification. That's a challenge, fam. It is a month of celebration, but it really is a month of protest because not all of us are free. Our siblings that are still not free from persecution, and if they're not free, then we cannot be free as a people because our freedom is tied to their freedom. Kevin and I focuses his book on the thoughts we have and actions we can take as a church, specifically regarding our siblings that are unhoused. And if we think about it, those that are experiencing homelessness are definitely not experiencing freedom and peace. Definitely not experiencing that collective freedom. One thing I wanted to bring up is this idea of people first language. Everybody say people first language. All right. One way we can spread shalom is if we start when we're explaining something and we're talking about people or addressing people, we can use the person first in the language. One of the things we like to do as human beings is we like to categorize people. So we like to say those people or that group of that person group or those. Like, for example, one of the things that we say a lot of times is homeless people, right? If you think about that, if we're talking about that group of individuals, that takes away the entire human from the conversation. It's putting it in a category, and we're just saying everybody's like this. Everybody who doesn't happen to have an address is in this category. One way that we can work on that with people first language is we can talk about individuals and call them our siblings, right? Then we can say siblings who are unhoused or siblings who are dealing with homelessness. Or we can just call them our siblings and just leave the category out. Everybody with that, maybe? Okay, good. All right. I think I'm talking to the right group. Everybody was like, why do we have to say homeless? Yes. Why do we have to say homeless? That's the question we should be asking. We can also talk about our siblings that are members of the LGBTQIA2S+ community. Or we can just talk about our siblings and leave out the categories. We can talk about a person who's on the autism spectrum rather than an autistic person. You see the difference, right? The person is not the category. It might be something that they're experiencing, but it is not their full identifier. An individual with a learning difference, that's a new one that I've learned, rather than learning challenges, or learning difficulties, or learning disabilities, it's just a learning difference. I myself deal with some of those. These are ways that we can avoid classifying someone by a category. Rather, we see them as a person first who happens to be a member of a certain group. They are not the label, and the people are always first. This leads us to a bigger picture concept that will help us to continue to elevate the loving grace of God for all. Another concept is narrative justice. Say narrative justice. I love it. It's to correct these false stories that are being spread and that cause mistreatment and criminalization. And today we're going to talk specifically about groups of individuals who just don't have a home address. But the narrative justice is when we listen to a story when people say, hey, this is why people do this. This person is doing that. This person is this. And we got to pause real quick and we got to ask ourselves, is that the whole story? Is that even true? Are we just making assumptions about people? And I'm telling you, fam, I've been doing this work for a while and I am guilty of this. So please don't think I'm trying to tell y'all I got this worked out. I do not. I constantly make these mistakes and I have to correct myself on a regular basis. Jeremiah 29:7-11 reminds us of that collective peace that is shalom. Shalom is a result of the liberation of the oppressed, all of the oppressed. Today I want to share what I've seen and what I've been learning that pertains specifically to those that are dealing with poverty and homelessness. For example, one of the things that happens quite a bit is linking poverty and homelessness with a judgment on why that person is experiencing those things. And it really diminishes like the structural and societal barriers that are forced upon that individual and the things that have come up that are out of their control. Nye in his book cites a recent poll by the Washington Post and Kaiser Research that found that, this one really troubled me, but I get it. Christians are more than twice as likely as non-Christians to associate poverty with a lack of effort. Christians are more than twice as likely as non-Christians to associate poverty with a lack of effort, as opposed to difficult circumstances. This focus on individuals' failure versus systemic pressure implies that people experiencing homelessness deserve that plight. And therefore, we as Christians are morally justified in letting them face the consequences of their own failures. There's a lot of people in this room right now that are troubled by that. There's hope. There's hope. It's really up to us as people of God to work to correct that narrative within ourselves and then within those in our circle of influence. Because I'll tell you right now, fam, it's not true that every single person is on the street because of their own failure. It is not true that every single person that is dealing with poverty it's their fault. They've made these mistakes. They've had poor life decisions. Those things are not true. Some of the beliefs and conjectures that I've heard, that I've experienced, that I used to say about people who are experiencing homelessness are damaging the movement towards solving homelessness. Some of them, I heard this quite a bit, and this happens all the time. I hear it still today. People are flocking to California to become homeless because of our weather. So we have to correct that narrative, fam. It's up to us to correct that narrative. If that's the truth, the top 5 communities, LA is number 1 for homelessness. You got the Bay Area coming in close right around 2nd and 3rd. There's Seattle. There's Florida. But New York, fam, New York is one of the top 5. Wait, the weather thing doesn't make sense. But the actual studies prove that the real reason, and there's a study here I have that was just released 2 weeks ago. This is from UCSF, just did this study on homelessness, causes, things that happen. I would love to get this in your hands. If you want it, we can send it out after this. I can email it. There's an executive summary, and there's 70-something pages, so it depends on your printing situation. You can borrow mine if you need to. But this study really digs into the causes of homelessness. And based on some of those narratives, they've come up with some facts I want to share with you. According to this study, California is home to more than 171,000 people that are unsheltered. 171,000 people. It's home to only 12% of the US population, but half of the US homeless population. That's called disproportionate. Have you ever heard people talk about disproportionate? We only have 12% of the US population, but we have 50% of the homeless population. Fact number 2, 89% of California's unsheltered population lost their housing in the state of California. 89%. 89%, that's 9 out of 10, fam. That means almost everybody is from here that is here on our streets. 75% currently are unhoused in the same county where they last had housing. 75%. And just so you know, Alameda County, it's 86%. So we have 86% of the people in Alameda County that are unhoused are from here. 19% of our siblings that are unhoused entered homelessness from prolonged jail and prison stays, where few reported having received services prior to having exited that facility. Those whose names were on a lease prior to entering homelessness reported a median of 10 days notice of eviction. 10 days notice. So that would be next Wednesday. How many of you could move your entire house by next Wednesday? How many of you could secure housing by next Wednesday? How many of you could find a place to stay? You probably would be staying in your car. Sound familiar? Until you're not able to pay for that registration anymore. And then, those whose names were not on leases reported a median of 1 day notice of eviction. I got chills when I think about that. In my personal experience, I've learned that the causes of homelessness are as unique as the individual is experiencing it. I've often been asked this question, and I've talked about it here before, about substance abuse. And is it people are homeless because of substance abuse, or do they use because they're homeless? And according to the UCSF study, many reported using drugs and alcohol to help them cope with the circumstances of homelessness. Cold is pain, fam. But also my response to that question is, what about grace? What about grace? Does it matter? Why do we feel that we have to know if people are using or have a mental health diagnosis? We don't ask that question about people that are in houses. Why do we have to have something to blame? And I'm 100% guilty of this, fam. So just so you know, this book has shook me. I am shooketh, as the youngsters say. This makes me think about the poll where it was determined that Christians feel morally justified in letting people face the consequences of their own failure. In the last 2 weeks, I had a meeting with a local law enforcement agency here, and we were talking about issues with the unhoused population off of our property or right outside our gates, right? And the question came up. They said, well, if you guys have the shelter, you signed up for that, right? So why is it the law enforcement's responsibility or their fault that they should deal with that? This is what somebody very high up in the law enforcement agency asked me. And they were very earnest, and they weren't rude, they weren't mean. It was just a very pointed question. If you say you want to help the unhoused population, then why do you keep calling us? I thought you wanted to help them. And I will say, we try not to call. We try not to. But also, our staff are staff that are here to feed people, give people showers. Our training is based upon, that's where the shower is. Here's a way for us to be safe in here. And if you need help, we got to call law enforcement. And law enforcement's response, and I'm telling you, this person is a very kind individual. They are a Christian. Their question to me was, if you signed up for this, why is it our fault? My response was, that thinking is actually what's causing this problem. That's something that I'm learning, because they had to blame it on something. And since we all stood up here as a church many years before I got here and said, hey, we're going to serve this population, then we've opened ourselves to criticism from all sides, right? It's true, but that thought process is what keeps us where we currently are and where this number of homelessness grows every single year. Even though we're taking people out of that situation, more people are entering into that situation. The solution is definitely not to assign blame and full responsibility to law enforcement. But this issue is bigger than one strategy, one idea, one program, one organization, one possible solution. This is a whole community issue that will truly take the whole community to solve. And that's what I'm seeing, fam. When people are exiting homelessness, it's because there's an entire group of people surrounding that individual. Back to grace. Nye goes on to state, none of us deserve the grace that God extends to us, yet it's extended to us all the same. For people experiencing homelessness, grace may feel far away, cut off by a world that sleeps better by believing that everyone is where they deserve to be. Nye says this. But grace tells a different story, and it sets the standard for what we all deserve as children of God. If we embrace it, grace can lead us home. And that's the title of his book. Our faith traditions, the Bible, and our own experiences, if we're willing to truly listen to those experiences and the lesson underneath, teach us that grace is undeserved and unearned by us. It's by God's identity that we gain grace, not by our own current standing in society or our lack of sin or the cool things that we've been able to accomplish. God extends this grace based upon who God is, not on who we are. Say that again. God extends this grace based upon who God is, not who we are. So if we're receiving grace freely that we didn't deserve, it's our calling to extend that grace. For many of us, this can be that hard part, right? Because we want to have something to blame. It's a natural tendency. I know, that's why we're here, y'all. We're here to recharge, to ask God, what should we be doing in this situation? You've got to ask those questions. And I'll tell you, like I just had an episode last week where I got in my feelings in an interaction with somebody who is obviously just traumatized. And I walked away, and then I walked back, fam. I walked back to re-engage in an argument. I didn't need to. It was over. But I was weak in that moment. And it happens, right? Am I the only one? Okay, good. I was feeling sweaty right there. I just got sweaty real quick. I saw blank stares. I'm sorry. I'm like, whew. But we re-engage in those things, and we got to pause, and we got to stop, and we got to take a deep breath, and we got to go back and say, maybe I don't need to blame something. Maybe this is just a rough situation that this individual is in, and I just happen to come in interaction with it. Should someone who commits violence against others as a result of being a survivor of repeated abuse be outcast from our community? That's a tough one. That's a tough one. Outcast from our community doesn't actually solve anything. Do people deserve homelessness? Do good things happen to good things? Do good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people? Who deserves $1 from me? What if those people don't want it? What if they don't want help? What if they don't want to get out of homelessness? What if they don't want to improve their situation? Nye dives into this thought of resistance in this book. And I'm telling y'all, let Kevin Nye tell you. I'm just talking from my own experience. But people that say no to a service offering, they're labeled as what we call service resistant. I hear this all the time in meetings when I'm with the county and with other agencies. And they'll say, we offered services, they declined services. Often the time, the person that says that is wearing a weapon. And I don't know about you, it's hard for me to accept services and help from my dad. I don't know if there's an authority situation with my own father, right? And he's like, here, take this. And I'm like, nah, I don't need it. I'm fine. I got this. as I trip and fall down the stairs, right? Much less somebody who has that much power, like power over your life and your current situation, your own freedom. People are labeled as service resistant. The truth is, I've met thousands of individuals. I was sitting here looking, and I was like, is that an exaggeration? It's not. I've met thousands of individuals experiencing homelessness over the years. And I've never personally met, and Kevin even talks about it too in his book, he's never personally met somebody who's truly service resistant. They don't want any services. But I have met people that'll tell me no. I had one couple in Livermore that was living in a creek, and she was in the middle of cancer treatment, going through regular chemo. And her partner and her decided they wanted to stay there because their dogs were their family. They had a housing opportunity. She didn't want to split from her partner, and she didn't want to split from her dogs. So she chose to endure cancer treatment living in a tent in a creek. Is that service resistant? Or is that pro-family? Is that these are the people and these are the animals that are going to help me through this? I'd rather do that than go live in a sterile place. Let's stop saying that people don't want it, fam. Can we do that? Can we make a commitment to stop saying that people don't want it? Yeah? Even if somebody tells you they don't want it, we got to ask ourselves, are they saying they don't want any help, or are they saying they don't necessarily think that that's a good fit for them? A senior who's been staying in this shelter for over 2 years ended up actually having to go to the doctor for about 3 months last year. Had a major intestinal issue, came back still with us, no prospects for housing, 0 prospects for housing. Wasn't able, no list, no anything. 2 weeks ago, got notice that he's getting a house. I happened to be here late. I was covering. I got the notice. I went into the shelter. I kneeled down to him. He's already laying down. It's 8:30 at night. He's laying down on the ground. I kneel down to him, and I'm like, man, you got housing. And immediately he starts to have an anxiety attack. I was so excited. I'm like, man, it's housing. And he's like, if it's in Oakland, I'm not going. Where is it? Where's the apartment? What paperwork do I need? Where do I need to go? He starts asking me. He says, if it's in Oakland, I'm not going. If it isn't close to a CVS, I can't go. How am I going to get to my doctor's appointment this coming Thursday? Who's going to help me get around? How do I get everything from my shed right here? I've got storage right here. Who's going to take that to there? I don't have a car. Where is this place? How much is it going to be? And he's like having this moment, and I was like, hey, bud, hey, I'll be right back. I didn't know what to say. I went back to the office. I asked for more help, asked for support, and they sent me this whole 24-page pamphlet. It has a picture of the unit. It has all the questions, because this is not the first time that somebody's had a problem selecting a place. He had 4 days notice. 4 days notice that you got a house, and if you don't go there in 4 days, it'll go to the next person, because we have 171,000 people experiencing homelessness on the streets of California. When I showed him the brochure and answered all his questions, he was able to simmer down. But I was dejected, fam. I was like, man, this guy doesn't, I messed him up. I harmed him in this situation. I'm trying to help him, and I caused him to have anxiety. But all these questions he's asking, don't you get a chance to ask those questions? When you pick a community to live in, when you pick a house, when you pick a school district for your children, when you pick where the local stores are, when you start looking at the maps, there's this Zillow. I don't know if you guys have ever messed with Zillow, but if you go there, it'll tell you all the things you need to know, right? And I literally went to this guy who's laying down and told him, hey, you got a house, you're moving in on Thursday, and just expected him to take any house with no information. It's not that he was service resistant. It's that he deserves to know that he's going to have all the supports available in his community. Yes? I got to ask myself a question when I walked away. Is that a resistance problem, or a lack of appropriate services, or lack of appropriate preparation for an individual? More specifically, is it his problem or is it our problem as a community? I believe this is a much higher level issue than just labeling him as ungrateful. He deserves to get a place that meets his needs like you and I do. So we talked about grace, we talked about housing resistance or service resistance. Now we're going to talk about housing first. Say housing first. Everybody still awake? I know it's warm. I'm trying to speak with dynamics to keep it going. Okay, I see some hands in the back. I don't know if that's a question or if they're just telling me they're awake. All right, so the final topic I wanted to broach today is housing first. I hope we get to continue this conversation. This is a unique opportunity. This is a one-off from our series. But I hope we'll be able to dig deeper into this book. And if you can dig into that book, if you'd like to email me, or we can set up times to maybe talk about it, I'd love to have this conversation continue. But one of the things he talks about is the housing first model. Many traditional programs that aim to end homelessness are merit-based. So think about this, and this might have to do with that study about Christians and struggling. If somebody's sober, they can do this thing. If somebody gets and keeps a job, they can do this thing. If somebody has great behavior, they can do this thing. If somebody's able to get a job and get a down payment, last month we moved somebody out of our tiny homes. This guy's been in our tiny homes about 8 or 9 months. Got a place, got matched, got a voucher. And when we went to go move him in, he needed to pay first month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, a credit deposit. And then when he got to the unit, they no longer provide refrigerator, oven, microwave. I would be devastated if I had to buy a refrigerator before I went to a house, because you got to measure it, and then I got to save up for several months. That's not something that I have in my budget. This man has no money. All he had was the money he was using to pay his bills. He's trying to pay some things down. So it cost us over $8,000 to move this guy into a unit to utilize a voucher. There's something wrong with that system, right? Like, we're talking about a guy who was sleeping in his car. We got him into this transitional tiny home. And then, okay, but there's a beautiful program that we have access to, right? We got this funding with this last round. We have $40,000 a year to help people move in. You do the math on that, we can help 5 people a year to move in. And that's not unique. That wasn't super expensive. That's wild to me. That's wild to me. But merit-based programs tend to have some sort of qualification, right? And we get it. It's like, hey, we're justifying, we're trying to help people to get sober. The studies demonstrate that requiring sobriety never increases sobriety. Isn't that wild? Because it's not about, does this person want to be sober or not? It's, do they have the services? Do they have the support? Do they have the program? Do they have the love to be able to work on sobriety? So housing first really goes against our own implicit biases. We all have them. I have them. You have them. We have these things that we believe to be true completely. That's what I'm asking us today. That's what Kevin and I is asking us to question. What are our implicit biases about people experiencing homelessness? So housing first says, if you get somebody into a house and then wrap them around with services and support, they'll be able to sustain it. And fam, this is not just an idea. This is actually what they call an evidence-based practice. It's happened across the country. And they're finding time and time again, if you put somebody in a house and you wrap them around with support, they do well. How wild is that? It's working. Once you get somebody into a house, they're able to sleep, they're able to shower, they're able to use a restroom when they need to use the restroom, not when it's available. They eventually begin to take steps towards achieving their own goals. Sometimes it takes all of that just to be able to establish a goal. Without housing, the drain on energy and resources, a tractor beam that pulls people back into the streets. The solution is truly to just house people first. Like that's it. Like, Just house people. We just house people, we can solve these challenges. We currently have a population of 39 million people in the state of California and 171,000 on the streets. I did some math. I'm not a math major. I'll have to check this with my wife. But if a group of 206 people got together and helped one person, 206 people supporting one person would solve homelessness in the state of California. It'd be so much cheaper and more effective to put someone in a house and provide on-site care around the clock than it is to try to police it or ambulance it or blame our way out of it. What we're doing now as a society is not working, fam. We're not keeping up with the problem. We're steadily losing ground. Not just in the numbers game, but theologically, we're losing ground. If we believe it's us and it's them. We're called to love the Lord our God with all our hearts and to love our neighbor as ourselves. But we've forgotten that our neighbors don't all have addresses. One of the things I love is when I hear somebody in a position of power talking about our homeless population as our citizens. Because they are. They're our neighbors. They're our siblings. Just don't happen to have an address today. And one of the primary causes, if you look in the study, number one cause is financial. And most of the causes financially is not that the person did not put effort. It's that cost of living increased. It's that they had an immediate loss of income in their family. It's that a family member passed away. It's that their name wasn't on a lease and they had one day to find another place. And this is proven in the study, so it's not just my thoughts, it's not just my conjecture. I want to ask the worship team to come up and play a little something more. Maybe we just think about this for a moment, if you wouldn't mind just reflecting with me. The goal today was not to make anybody here feel bad. I hope that's not what's coming out of this. Because we're doing the work here. This church is doing the work. Family, this week a deacon came here while we were working because all of our staff is focusing on getting the next shower and getting the next meal. And we're working on making sure that all 50 individuals that are here are able to have what they need. But a deacon came here and they went to sort through someone's molded personal belongings and retrieve anything that was of value for that individual and bring it to that individual and store it for them, because that individual happens to be in a hospital still months after an accident they were involved in. I've seen a rice cooker donated without asking because the one that was in our shelter wasn't working. I've seen volunteers and staff work overtime to repair a beat-up office for our brand new pastor that's coming in next week. I've seen the Housing First model work here on a daily basis. That guy who had zero process, zero prospects, zero paperwork turned in, he's now in a house. The picture they took of him when he was in his house, that, we're like, hey, can we use this picture? Can we share it? And I'll share it for you in the future. But it wasn't necessarily about him specifically today. But that picture that they took, if you look at it, he's closing the door in the picture. You know why? Because it's his door and he can close it. And he was done talking to us for a little bit. We're like, hey, can we get a picture? And he's like, see? That's dignity, fam. I want to share that this past week I met with Castro Valley Pride. They told me they only see 2 churches in this community doing tangible work that they can see to support this community, and we're one of them. They also told us that we need to do a little bit better about supporting and loving them. Both can be true at the same time. I'll ask you these questions as we just take a moment of reflection. Just sit and think on these. Who am I othering today? Who am I putting outside of the circle so that I can be inside a circle when God did not create a circle? It might be accidental. It might be based upon the way you were raised or influences that you've listened to, but our God calls us to do away with others. You realize that everyone is actually our neighbor. So who am I othering today? What do you think that God is putting on your heart to question from your beliefs about who deserves what? How can you work on accepting the grace that God has for you? Really accepting that you didn't deserve it, but you have it. If you can really accept that, then how can you work on giving that to others? Would you pray with me? God, we thank you so much for today. We thank you for this time to come together to celebrate, to dig into your word, to pray, to ask the Holy Spirit would change our hearts. We pray for forgiveness for those that we've othered, God. We pray for forgiveness for the actions that we've taken that have put people outside of a circle that we made. We pray, God, for enough housing for everyone in our community, in our county, in our state, in our country, and on the entire planet to have the housing they need to be able to live a life of welfare, a life of shalom. I thank you for the heart that you put on this church to serve this community. And I pray that we would know that there are great things that are happening, that we would be able to do even better, even more. But know that it is not through our power, God, but it is through yours. Thank you, Jesus.